Why do kids misbehave? In this episode, we are going to explore why kids do the things they do. Have you ever asked yourself, why does my child keep doing this or keep saying this? Has it ever been a head scratcher for you or the other caregivers in your life and you just can't quite figure it out? Today we're going to talk about some of those situations and also provide you with some resources for where you can learn more about why kids do what they do. Why do kids, young children especially, misbehave? As we go through these pointers about why kids do what they do, please think about a specific behavior or things that your child does that you've wondered about. It could be a behavior that drives you nuts or it's really distracting. Things don't go well. It might upset the whole family or it might upset your day or their day. Keep track to see if it can explain your child's behavior and maybe give you some ideas about how to intervene to better address the behavior when it happens. Remember, knowledge is power. When we know more, we have the ability to understand and then also broaden our options for how to respond. The information that I'm going to talk about, I want to credit to the Act Raising Safe Kids parenting program, which was developed by the American Psychological Association several decades ago. It's an evidence-based parenting program that is recognized worldwide as an effective parenting program. I think that there's value in pulling information from sources where they've already done some of the work and giving us ideas. And so I can expand on that because I think that it really helps to know why kids do what they do. So why do kids misbehave? Well, one reason is they're curious. You might remember, and it's delightful to experience this with your children, they're young and they're still learning. Have you ever just been filled with joy because your child has discovered something you might know all about, but they're discovering it for the first time, and the wonder on their face or the excitement they have because they figured something out is really exciting. And we want kids to have that curiosity. It's one of the very best tools as kids go through school, even into college, that they're just curious about stuff. They want to know more. Why does this work? How does this go? How are these things fitting together? We want that curiosity to be there for our children, and we want to encourage it and nurture it at a young age. We also want kids to be safe, and sometimes those two goals collide because kids want to experiment or try things that they might be kind of dangerous. In a different podcast, we'll discuss how to reduce the number of times you have to say no or don't touch in order to keep your kids safe. But just know that one reason they do things that we wish they wouldn't do is because they're curious. Another reason is because they just don't know stuff yet. Their brains are still developing, and their ability to wait, to share, to take turns, to problem solve, to find alternative strategies, to have what we call flexible thinking, to see other points of view, those things are still yet to develop. That part of their brain hasn't advanced enough for them to have that skill set. They're still even learning right from wrong. And so they do things like they throw something that perhaps might break something when it hits it or leave a dent, or they pound on things like the table or a piece of furniture that could leave a scratch or a mark, or they might pull on a dog's ear or a cat's tail or some other thing that you wish they wouldn't do because they just don't know that there's a cause and effect to their behaviors. They don't know how that's going to turn out, and so that can be really frustrating. They have a very difficult time putting themselves in another person's position at that young age. A third reason why kids misbehave is because they're bored. Have you ever been in a restaurant or a waiting room with your child and there was nothing to do? Very often, parents will turn over their cell phone to the child to entertain them with a game, which we can talk more about in another podcast episode, because that can be problematic down the road. But it's hard when kids are bored. Have you ever had an experience of being in a waiting room or shopping with your child and having them be bored? What is it you do to keep them entertained? Very often when kids have to sit still in a restaurant, they start to act up. And it's one reason that at least some family-friendly restaurants have activity books or coloring mats, or sometimes even short, small games that kids can play as a way of staying entertained. Have you ever been to a restaurant where maybe there was a 45-minute wait and you said, yeah, we're not going to stay here, and you go someplace else because you know your children just can't sit in one space in a lobby waiting for 45 minutes to be seated? Some of the most dreaded experiences for children are in public settings like waiting rooms, grocery stores, or on long car rides when they're bored. A fourth reason is because children don't have language to master communication and problem solve. And these things tend to show up when they're tired, when they're hungry or overwhelmed, when they're disappointed. And think about it for yourself. How well do you as a parent communicate or problem solve when you're tired or hungry or overwhelmed or disappointed? And think about one of the most difficult times for children is bedtime, and the struggle that many of us have with children when it's time to go to bed. Maybe they're not tired, or maybe they don't think they're tired, even though they look like they're very tired. And they become dysregulated because they're not wanting to go to bed. They'd rather stay up. They'd rather not stop doing the thing that they're doing. And so oftentimes conflicts occur around bedtime routines or around morning routines because those are just difficult transition times for some children. And so I think it's important to recognize that they don't have the communication skills to recognize their emotions, to talk about what they're feeling, to always say, gosh, I'm feeling pretty tired, or my tummy's telling me I'm hungry. Or when kids feel like they're overwhelmed, they shut down, or they might have a temper tantrum because they just don't know where to go or start. Or when they hear the word no and they really had their hopes set on stopping at that really nice ice cream place, but it's closed, or maybe the line is too long. All the things that happen in our days that we can roll with, that we can adapt to as adults, children struggle with those kinds of little hiccups. And so they don't have the skills always to communicate that. Another reason, they may be getting something maybe like attention or some of the reinforcement for the behavior. When we look at the whole concept of noncompliance in the literature, it's a very short period of time, about 10 seconds, from the time a parent gives the child a command until the child actually starts to follow through with it. And all the time in between is considered positive reinforcement for negative behavior. So for example, if you tell your child it's time to go to bed and a half hour later they're still doing what they were doing, playing a game, watching a show, engaged in some other activity, while that might have been constructive for them, it also reinforced them not listening to you. And so in some ways that's a form of misbehavior. We call it not listening. Of all the reasons that we've just described, which ones make the most sense for what you're seeing with your child or with your children? I don't even know that that's a complete list, but it's a list that covers most of the reasons why kids do what they do. So if you can identify some of those reasons as making sense to you, your next question is, well, what can I do about this misbehavior? And I would start with encouraging you just to understand where your child is at developmentally. I think that it would be very time-consuming. Entire three credit courses are taught at universities on child development, and that's just the beginning point. But when it comes to development, kids are like moving targets, and as soon as you know what to expect from a 2-year-old, they become 3. And as soon as you know what happens when they're 3, they turn 4. And so we might know where they're at, but it would really be helpful if we could anticipate what's coming next. And if we break this down, it's pretty easy to know that children first creep, and then they crawl, and then they walk, and then they run. There's generally a progression that kids go through when it comes to physical development. It can be really challenging, though, to try to figure out what's going on with other kinds of development. We have these standard measures that we know for our children's height and our weight. They go to visits with their medical provider. Sometimes families will have a place in the house where every time they have a birthday, they have the child stand against the wall or the door, and they mark how tall they are and put the year that mark was made. We pay attention to their physical growth, and that's an important thing. But there's also this other part of their development that we don't give as much time to. It's their cognitive and their emotional development. A child's developing brain is not just physical development. They're also learning these social and emotional skills, and they can only learn these skills through relationships with us, with their parents, with other adults, with other children. Children don't learn social and emotional skills through technology, through electronics, through watching TV shows or playing games, especially young children. Older children certainly can, and there are good programs that we'll talk about in another podcast, like PBS specials and programming that are designed for children. Sesame Street's another classic example. But for the most part, they learn in real time with real people. Also, there's something different between knowing something and mastering it. Kids struggle with mastery until they master it. And some of you may recall times when your child tried something and quit right away because it came hard for them. I can certainly remember all the times I've worked with children who were really afraid to ride a bike because the first time they tried, they fell and it hurt. And they didn't want to get on that bike again. And eventually they got used to it. Their parents helped them. They found ways to do it. And first they worked on their steering, then they worked on their balance, or they worked on their balance and their steering, but they eventually got it. Knowing how something works and mastering it are very different things. Kids who are first starting to walk are more likely to fall. Kids who are first learning toileting can have accidents. Kids who get dressed sometimes put their shirts on backwards or get their pants on in a way that looks kind of funny. Even teenagers, when they're driving a car, just because they have their license doesn't mean they've quite mastered it. And there's a reason car insurance is more expensive for teenagers than it is for most adults. Part of it is because they are more likely to have accidents because they don't have that experience that would at least convey some higher level of mastery. So while we're waiting for children to master these skills, not just driving, but the social emotional skills, they are practicing and gaining more skill and confidence with each attempt. And that's the important piece, that attempts are layered for children. They have to do these things over and over and over, day in and day out. To add another layer of complexity, social emotional skills and child development doesn't always occur on a specific timetable. We're talking about ranges. And so some children can be a little more advanced with their language. Some children can be a little more delayed with their walking or crawling. And so when you look at developmental milestones, please remember that these are averages and ranges. Some children crawl sooner than others. Some children are potty trained or begin using their words sooner than others. Some ride their bike sooner than others. The key point to remember is that all children, even teenagers and parents, are still learning. And if you see problematic behavior, one step to consider is determining if this behavior is normal or typical for their age. So for example, young children are more likely to have tantrums than older children. And they have them more frequently and sometimes for longer periods of time. Why? They don't have the words to express how they're feeling, and so they just fall apart. They also don't have as many strategies or as much successful experience at self-regulation. Another example are children who are aggressive. There's typically a sharp decline in aggressive behavior with children as they transition from 3 to 5 years of age through kindergarten. And it's because they're having this opportunity to learn from their peer group. They look around the classroom, no one else is hitting. They're in a different environment. They're learning from their caregivers. They're also learning how to use words to get what they need. When children are much younger, if one of their siblings or another playmate takes a toy from them and they don't like it, they're more likely to grab it back and hit them with it, and then it's theirs again for a while. It's kind of a might makes right way of approaching it. Of course, that's not what we want kids to do, but they don't have the language to say, how about if you play with that until lunchtime and after lunch I play with it? It would be great if a 3 or 4-year-old could do that, but they don't have the developmental ability yet. So they learn more about how to wait and more about how to deal with minor setbacks through practice and through all the modeling they experience. When you have some spare time, and I know that it's sometimes hard to come by time, please check out several of the websites listed in the show notes that provide great information for parents about your child's development. This can help you better understand and respond to your child because you know more about their ability at the age they're at, and you can even read ahead to say what's coming next. Keeping up with your child or teenager's development can save you a lot of frustration and give you more tools for how best to respond to your child. If you are concerned that your child is struggling with a developmental milestone that you're learning about, please talk with your child's primary care provider about your concerns. There are many resources that cover these developmental milestones. Most of them are really geared for children ages 1 through 5, but there are several websites that also address milestones for school-age and adolescent children, which I also think are really valuable just to understand where they're at with their emotional, social, physical, and sexual development. Thank you for tuning in and considering this parenting topic. I hope that this information added to your growing toolbox of parenting your child or children. Please consider exploring other topics in this series. Remember, no one parenting tool can do everything. We need many tools to become the best parents for our children. Your children's future depends on you and the time and effort you invest in them today.